Greetings, everybody. This is Dean Evans. Welcome you all, some for the first time, some for like the umpteenth time, to the Peer-to-Peer Network monthly meeting. We're here on GoTo. There's a bunch more people signed up, so I think they'll be trickling in over the course of this. But I'm pleased to announce that we're sort of back in action with the P2P monthlies. The Peer-to-Peer Network, for those of you who don't know what it is a Connecticut-based group of multifamily housing stakeholders who are committed to improving, in some cases radically improving, the environmental and comfort and health and other performance metrics of multifamily housing in the state, and also connected to the region around us in terms of what they're also doing in these areas. And we've been meeting pretty much monthly, except maybe sometimes in the summer, for over almost 4 years now. And recently, we have gotten engaged. A smaller group of the peer-to-peer has been engaged in developing educational materials to try and work with a qualified allocation plan, allocation of points for performance in Connecticut, and in the process developed educational programs about the value proposition of passive house and other high performance metrics, and also digging into the QAP a little bit in general. And that process lasted through, the first parts of this year. And now we're sort of going back to the peer-to-peer network that we've had before, where we bring in presenters to talk to us about issues of importance that we think all of us will benefit from, and then have a discussion about those issues. Today, I'm going to turn it over to Susan O'Dell to do the presenting, but it's very in line with what we were doing as part of the QAP, that we're going to talk about the costs of passive and other high performance housing metrics. I'll just a logistics discussion. You all, as the audience, are currently muted, and we're looking to have questions typed into the question box that you all should see on your console. And then we will ask as many of those as we can of Todd when he's done. So with that, I'll turn it over to Susan to introduce Todd.
Thank you, Dean. I am pleased to introduce Todd Rothstein, who is Director of Construction Services at Avesta Housing. Avesta Housing is a nonprofit affordable housing provider with 45+ years of experience as a leader in affordable housing development and property management in southern Maine and New Hampshire. Their mission is to improve lives and strengthen communities by promoting and providing quality, affordable homes for people in need. Avesta is a founding member of Portland 2030 and received a NeighborWorks Green designation in 2016. They are headquartered in Portland, Maine, and currently have 98 properties, 2,700 apartments, and 2 assisted living facilities in their portfolio. Within this portfolio, 4 buildings are LEED certified, 1 is ENERGY STAR certified, 1 is built to passive house standards, 8 developments have solar thermal energy, and 9 have photovoltaic solar panels. Avesta Housing's most significant green achievements relate to their development of building design standards, and Todd is responsible for managing these standards. He is part of the pre-construction team for all projects and has served as owner's rep on selected projects. He provides project management support and construction oversight to the maintenance and asset management departments during major renovations. He is a certified passive house consultant, a member of Efficiency Maine's Low Income Advisory Group, and a former adjunct professor at Southern Maine Community College. And now I will turn it over to Todd.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that introduction. I didn't know I've accomplished so much in this period of time, so I'm very proud of the work I've done and all the effort. I want to just share a few minutes before I started working at Avesta, which I've worked 13 years, actually 20 years in manufacturing. And part of that was large casework, cabinetry, doing project management for local convenience stores, retailers. So I had done almost 20 years of project management experience. Then from there, shifted over to working for a general contractor local in Portland, where I worked on Irving Oil gas stations, restaurants, and had renovated the Avesta Housing facility. I told them what I was going to do, and I did it within the time frame. They were impressed. About a year later, they were looking for somebody in the construction field to join them to help their development team, project management team, their property management team, and also their maintenance. So I took the leap and learned so much from just reading blueprints to actually developing the blueprint of what we're going to build. And I started with Avesta in 2013, about 8 years ago. And after the first few years, was doing most high density retrofits, deep energy retrofits, learning about what makes the difference, and then trying to measure, were they actually doing what we thought they were going to do. And in 2017, a group of property managers asked me to say, Todd, is it worth it? Does this work? What are we getting with our engineers asking us or telling us, spend more money here, spend more on the mechanicals, on the windows, on the envelope? We don't even know if it's making a difference. And so I just started looking at the deep energy retrofits that I had been doing, because at the time I wasn't really a leader of the or embedded in the development team as much as I am now. And what that showed was, on average, we were saving 30% or more when we were doing some of these deep retrofits, which was great. But then that led to, what about new construction? And what are we really doing, and how are we benefiting by the work that we're doing from, let's say, a code compliant building to something people were calling a pretty good house, to then passive house, LEED, Energy Star. Like, what was the benefit of spending more money on the buildings and the residents? And so we started a process. And I'm going to start my presentation after just that small intro and talk to you about the questions that we were trying to overcome 4 years ago. This is pretty simple. Tracking energy performance in multifamily buildings. Now, this is what this webinar is all about. And Avesta, like Susan had said, we have almost 100 buildings, because in fact we're under construction right now with more than 4 buildings, and we have another 4 in the queue. So 100 is a pretty safe number of properties to discuss. When I did this presentation first, or started looking at this information, here's what the challenge was. In affordable housing, we have fixed budgets. We have caps that we can't exceed. And we also, even at the time when I first did this in 2017, 18, labor costs were rising, material costs were rising. And we know that Mother Nature in Maine, -10-degree colds to 90 plus in the summer. So we knew that the outside environment had a 100-degree swing within a 12-month period. And in Maine, sometimes it's 50 degrees overnight. Now that means dissimilar materials work differently. How does that affect the building, the performance, and the residents? And of course, humidity, how the comfort level of, well, the outside would affect the inside. Remember, outdoor temperatures range anywhere from 100 degrees. Outdoor humidity almost 50% ranges, except we knew our residents wanted anywhere from 70 to 75, a 5-degree differential that they were comfortable with in their apartments. And humidity, comfort is between 40 and 60% humidity. Too low, it's too dry. Too high, it's moist, mold. There's a lot of issues with that. And of course, property management was always asking, Todd, how do we reduce our energy demands, because it's just costing too much. We were using oil back then, and so kerosene at times. So how are we going to reduce our costs? And thermal comfort. If we didn't have a building that provided that comfort for residents, trust me, the governor of our state heard about it. So that was everything that went into the challenges of building affordable housing, and quite frankly, any housing. And so we had to answer these questions. Can we prove that high performance buildings work? Is it worth the money? And can we display these findings in dollars and cents? And you notice it's 2 ways. Money-wise and common sense have to play into that factor. So the first thing I want to show you is a building that was built in 2017. This is a passive house building in Portland, Maine. It's a 45-unit building, and it was the first passive house that was done in Maine, in Portland, and the first passive house certified that Avesta had built. And so after 2017 and 18, I tracked the performance. I wanted to look, if you can see on the top right, the PHPP, which is the passive house estimating program, to see how much they estimated we would use in a year, and then how much natural gas we would use. That's for the hot water. And on the left, I started looking at breaking it down by cost per watt, by therm. Oh, this was what we were spending on electricity and for the natural gas. But where I highlighted is the most important for this conversation. We were seeing on average that each apartment was using about $69 or $70 of cost to actually all in plug load, heating load, cooling, and hot water. If break it down by square foot, it's about 99 cents per year or 8 cents per square foot per month. It was very interesting. So then I looked at another building. It was a different design, LEED. And this was in Gorham, Maine. It's a little inland, but basically it's in the same region, Maine. And this has a different approach on how they model, but the outcomes are, the goal is to be the same, reduce energy consumption. And in here, it's also electric for the heating, the hot water was natural gas. And when I did the math for the 2 years, 2017, 2018, again, $70 a month. This is a senior housing building. The other one was a multifamily. And about 88 cents a square foot per year. And I said, well, what does that mean? These are nice numbers, but what does that really go against? Is it good? Is it bad? And so I compared those numbers of how I would operate both Bayside Anchor and Ridgewood 2 against the allowance from the HUD Department of Housing and Urban Development, US Department of Housing and Urban Development. This was done in 2019, this chart. What they estimate for an electric setup for heating, cooking, lighting, you can see it on the left. A one bedroom is approximately $142 per month. A two bedroom average about $173 a month. That's the allowance that HUD would allow for somebody if it was an all electric building. And as you can see, Bayside Anchor and Ridgewood 2 were half, almost a third of the cost of what the allowance was. And that's because HUD's information was based on the old way of building buildings. And Bayside Anchor and Ridgewood are based on the new way of building buildings. So how are we going to compare the cost? Meaning I can see how Bayside Anchor works, I can see how Ridgewood 2 works, but can we compare all of our buildings? And also, how can we compare a good building versus a pretty good house or a code compliant? And so the Meadows at Grapevine Run fell into our lap. Of course, it was 3 years in the making, but this is a three unit or three building campus. And the first of the three buildings was done basically code compliant. It had propane, heating, and for hot water. It had a nice insulation, double pane windows, pretty basic, but a good building. It was completed in 2017. In 2019, we were already in construction with two more buildings, exactly the same shape, size, square footage, number of units, but they were going to be passive house through FIAS. And this gave me and all of you the opportunity to see that there really is a cost difference or a real cost comparison of the same two buildings. Now, I told you that the first building was completed in 2017, but our GMP that we first created in 2016 showed, if you look at the bottom on the left, 2.895 million. And this is the building itself. I pulled out all of the site work, all of the peripheral soft costs, everything, just the building. I compared it with in 2018's GMP of the other building that's passive house. And as you can see, it's 3.15. If you do the quick math, it's about an 8% difference. If you factor in just the 1.5% of inflation for the 2 years, we looked at it as a 5% difference between a code compliant and a passive house. And we were excited about that. The other thing to add that I didn't even factor in was the cost of labor inflated and the cost of materials in those 2 years did inflate, but I didn't have a way to factor it in. So just raw data, 5% different for the same buildings built 2 different ways. One code, one passive house. Now, how to compare the utility performance, because one of the first questions that I asked was, is it worth it? And does it make sense? And so this led to working with more people within our company. In fact, there's a person in this webinar, Nathan Howe, who's been instrumentally helpful in gathering information and collating it into a way that it's actually understandable and shows a real story. We took buildings that were double corridor that were built over just a block of time to then start gathering the information on all of their metrics for operational expenses, square footage, electrical consumption, the hot water, the therms, the per unit cost, the water consumption, number of people living in it. We just started gathering information. And then we took this and we shrunk it down to 17 buildings over a 12-year period that were very similar only in statute, double corridor buildings. There are some that were senior, family, and first housing. So they have different nuances. They're in different locations, but we just wanted to gather them to just, what is the information we're going to try to find to see how do they compare with each other. As you can see on the left, in yellow, this is just from the most recent, at the time of this data mining, 2017, which means at least was built and I had enough information to gather. And the first thing we looked at was you'll see million BTUs per unit, and that's middle of this document. But I want you to pay attention to the property names on the left, Bartlett Woods, Carlton Street, Bayside Anchor, they're all listed just by when they were completed. Over on the right, the building design, high performance, passive house, code, lead. We categorized how these buildings were built based on the materials that we used. Now I'm going to click the next slide. I want you to just keep your eye on the property slides, on the property column. And you can see when I go by million BTUs per square foot, all of the property names change. And then when you take your eye all the way to the right where it says building design, something happens, which is people go to their respective place in the sandbox, if you will. All the code compliant buildings drop to the bottom, and all of the higher performing, no matter what their certification, no matter what way we did it, they went to the top because they used less energy per square foot. That's it. We didn't manipulate anything else but that. So then we looked at, well, what is it total operating cost per unit? Because that's important for property managers and decision makers. Now, again, you want to play this game, look at the property names when I click the next slide, see if they change. And they move all around. And then you go back to the total operating column in the yellow. And then you look at the building design. What happens? The buildings change in their perspective category, except one thing is consistent. Code compliance is performing as it is, and the higher performing buildings, for the most part, you may get an outlier, but they're performing 50%, 100% better when we track it that other way. And then finally, we tracked it, or we wanted to show what is the total operating cost per square foot. Same thing is going to happen. The properties change up and down. The numbers will show that high performance buildings perform 50, sometimes 75% better than the code compliant buildings. So that was 2018, I started doing this presentation. And I felt that, how are we going to just actually continue this story? Because 1 year could be an anomaly. And so, like I said, Nathan Howe and I have been staying at this for 3 years. And we have our own jobs to do. I'm busy with project managing and helping buildings get built. Nathan is a development officer, making sure that his specific projects are getting built. And yet, as we go back and forth to look at the data, we're learning new information. And so we wanted to say, how do they actually work over a period of time, and see if there's a difference. Maybe it was just an anomaly. And so the first thing I'm going to show you is, we looked at the energy performance of senior and homeless buildings over a period of time, and it was a 3-year period. You can see the buildings here are based on from 2018 to 2005. There's a couple of new buildings in this chart from the last chart. There's a couple that came out. But these are all the senior and homeless. And the reason we did this is because we pay all the utility costs, and so we can track it easier. So we wanted to make sure it was apples to apples, collecting this data sample of how they performed. And you can see, as we've gotten more advanced, or we're building more buildings to a high performance standard, but there's on occasion you need to just, cost is king, and we couldn't afford high performance in this Houston Commons building, and it is what it is. We'll see how they perform. And we track by year, the number of units, square footage. Here's an important one, cost per square foot. And you can see it varies, but as the buildings were in 2005, 2010, 12, cost per square foot was lower. We're paying a little bit more money these days, well, quite a bit more money. And then the average, and they vary. So the next slide is actually going to be a 3-year average of the cost per unit, which means Ridgewood 2 at $700 per unit. If you times by the 24 units, there's your average cost. If you took the $723 and divided it by 12, it's back to $60 per unit per month, which was a slide that I had shown from 3 years ago. So we're still, actually, it's doing better than what we saw from 2 or 3 years ago. But it's still within line, that it's costing less to operate each unit. The other thing that I wanted to show, and which was really important, which was the metric tons per unit. Now, this part of the conversation is important because over the last 3 years, energy savings is king, but climate is now trumping just saving energy. Reducing our carbon footprint is paramount to our survival. And so we wanted to track, is there a difference? Well, of course there would be if we use more electrification, or if we use less or more efficient heating systems and less fossil fuels. And so it's consistent that the higher performing buildings is using 40%, sometimes 50%, almost 50% less, producing less carbon emissions, which is important. Now we wanted to just track the family, and we're going to have similar results. This is just by year, and you can see any high performance Energy Star lead code, they're all mix match based on what we built that particular year from 2006, 2019. When we just do per unit average cost, the unit cost, as you can see, all the high performance go to the top, and the code, they go where they belong. We're not even saying they're bad, or I'm not saying they're bad, these code performers, but I am saying high performance buildings are better. And same outcome when you look at the metric tonnage being created. It's far less, 1.5 times, 2 times, 2.5 times less high performance building versus a code compliant building. We're doing our part. And so, in summary, we needed to answer these questions. Can we prove that high performance buildings work? I say yes. Is it worth the money? It is worth the money. And I can answer your questions about, if you have them, about the cost. But I will say to this one, you spend a little more money, clearly. You recoup that money by the reduction in your operating costs. And when you add the resilience, the comfort of the residents, and the reduction in carbon, you're ahead. Can we display the findings in dollars and cents? I think we did. I think you can also, if you do the same exercises that we did. I just want to leave you all with these questions that have been answered, and any questions that you have, I'd like to answer them best I can. Susan?
This is Dean. I'll come in. Can you hear me okay, Todd?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I'll sort of facilitate questions. I think one last one that you might want to put down, one more box, is for many in the audience, is this music to our ears? Question mark. And I think the answer is another yes. But I'm looking, I maybe want to ask Rudy this. So I have a question. It looks like, Bob, I had a question, and it looks like he started to type it, but I don't see the full question. Oh, here it is. Hold on. Let me just pull this down. Did you ever adjust your analysis for the difference in the weather, e.g. degree days?
So
okay. Can you answer that one first?
Just tell Bob that we're going to have that for him. And that was the reason why we did the three-year analysis. Is we're now going to do the heating degree days, but we had to get the analysis first before we could really adjust for heating degree days. But we will do that. And the reason that we didn't do it each year individually, because they're all relatively in the same region, but we want to accommodate that over the 3-year period by the heating degree days. And we will have that as a follow-up.
All right. Next question is from Melissa. Does Avesta, excuse me. Yeah, I'm not doing them quite in order. Melissa, does Avesta pay, Melissa Cops, does Avesta pay all the tenants' utility bills, costs?
In family, no. In senior housing, yes. And in the homeless first homes, yes, we pay all the utilities. That's why the second round of the 3-year average, we separated them, because we don't get all the utility bills for family, but we wanted to show how they compare to the same. However, I want to follow up that response, if you don't mind.
Sure.
We're about to do a passive house family property in Conway, New Hampshire. We're also doing 2 high performance buildings in South Portland. And we looked at because they're all electric, HUD would require us to do 2 things or have a choice, one of 2 things. Either give the resident the allowance, which is what I showed you that chart, $142 for a 1-bedroom, $173 for a 2-bedroom. Our analysis have shown that we can probably do the same energy consumption of somewhere between 70 and if it's a 2, maybe a little higher, but we'll be better off. We're going to start offering in these high performance buildings, we'll pay the electric bills, we'll pay all the energy bills, assuming that we're going to beat the averages because we're building high performance buildings. Is that
Terrific. Okay. We've got a question from Donald Berg.
Yes.
Todd, have you done any buildings with batteries and I think it means versus and generators, I guess is what he's saying, where buildings are master metered?
Great. So we have about a dozen buildings that have generators. We have a lot of buildings with generator backup or hookups. However, I just reached out this morning. I have a contact from Generac who's talking about batteries because yes, the next conversation that we're having is resiliency. Well, and actually resiliency started after Katrina, when people started in your area, New York, and on the real coast started bringing communities and their mechanical systems above water level, sea level, and bringing them on the roof or second floor. We don't have that issue currently, but going all electric, you need either have a generator or, again, I am going to start talking about what does it take to have a battery backup for at least some resilience. So I don't have the battery yet, but it's a follow-up or a trend that we're looking at soon.
Okay, another one from Bob.
Sir, do you mind asking that with the battery? I know I answered my question, did I do it, didn't I? But a follow-up is, I'm curious why did he ask the question? Is he thinking it, and what has he found so far from his research?
Yeah, Todd, let me pause for a second here, and Rudy, if you're still here, can we set the function going where people can raise their hands, and then I can unmute them and they can talk?
Yeah, absolutely. If people want to raise their hand, I can unmute them. Yeah, if we want to. Sure.
Okay, so Bob, I'll assume you've raised your hand, and I'm going to unmute you now. And I think you may have to unmute yourself as well. Is that correct, Rudy?
That's right.
Bob, if you can unmute yourself, and then, yeah. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and start a conversation with Todd about your question and maybe elaborate it on it a little bit more. It looks like you're unmuted here. Are you on a phone that might be muted? Yeah, I'm not hearing Bob, so let me see. There's a chat message here that might say, okay. Okay, Bob, that doesn't seem to be working, so maybe we'll round back on that, and I'll finish up the questions and then see if we can go into a more interactive mode. And Todd, can you still hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, so we got a couple of others, and then maybe we'll go back and see if I can open up this more free-form discussion. And Donald Berg said, he was talking about batteries and generators. He said batteries and PV, I should have said.
Oh,
so have you done any batteries and PV that are master metered?
Got it. We do have that. Actually, you got to unmute Nate because he's on the call, I think, too, on the webinar too. He's more in tune. But we are introducing, of course, photovoltaics, arrays where we can onto our system, especially with all electric. Now, we know that the rooftops aren't big enough to make us net zero, right? There's only a certain capacity on the roofs, but we are installing as many solar arrays as we can. We know that the solar arrays in Maine have a straight purchase has a 16 to 20 year payback. We were hoping for better if we could, but that's what we're basically working under, those cost impacts. And it has helped in many instances to reduce electrical consumption and make the buildings a little more manageable. And the batteries coming up, because what do we do if we lose electricity? We don't have a generator.
Okay, and I noticed Don was saying that he needed to be unmuted. So Don, are you there? Do you want to continue this line of questioning with Todd?
Yes, I am, Todd. Good morning.
Morning.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, we're still good.
I'm chairman of the Housing Authority in Wellington, Connecticut. We've got some solar on the roofs. I think we have enough roof area to do solar, although it's steeply pitched with snow guards, so we have an issue of being able to generate during snowfalls. So, and right now all of our buildings are rate 1 Eversource individually metered. And trying to do solar and trying to figure out, oh, maybe now at this point in time, maybe do batteries and do go back to a rate 30 master metered building in order to share the load amongst 6 apartments per building, as opposed to trying to guess what each individual apartment will consume. So just wondered whether you had any experience with generators and PV and how to fund it, and whether you get stuck without getting any federal, et cetera.
Because I'm mostly on the construction side. We work with the development team. If you're talking about funding and how you pull all that off, I know that, for instance, Ridgewood is a senior property that is, I believe it's master metered, and it has a solar array. And I think we've checked off all of those boxes you're referring to. The funding portion, I would want to refer to my team, and I would love to be able to get your information and, continue that dialogue.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. You're welcome.
Okay, so we've got one now. I'm going to mute you, Don. And Alex Exposito, you're self-muted. You have your hand up. I can unmute you if you want to unmute yourself, and I'll read your question in the interim. Alex is saying, agreed that high performance is more energy efficient than code compliant, but what have you found to be the payback period for the increased upfront cost upgrades? I think you were starting to talk about that a little bit, Todd, but maybe you could unpack that a little bit more.
Sure.
And Alex, I've unmuted you if you want to come in.
We have seen it. It's about 15 years to 20 years, even on the payback of, even with the high performance buildings.
I'm sorry, can you say one more time, Todd? It's about how much?
15 years.
15, 1-5. Okay. All right, Alex, your hand is still up. It says you're self-muted. If you want to come in, I've unmuted you from here. And then Seema Malani had a question. Have you looked at fuel cells, Todd?
Not yet. No. No.
And I guess, is there any reason, or are you, or it's not yet?
Not yet. So what we're looking at right now, actually, is because of our cost caps and our labor costs in Maine are outpacing even the cost caps that would be reasonable to hit. And so we're trying to find ways to build buildings that we can afford and that our housing authority will allow us to spend. And so we're looking at how can we deliver heat, cooling, which, by the way, where cooling is, even in Portland, where it was unheard of when I almost first started 8 years ago, people said cooling, Maine Housing didn't even allow it. They thought it was unreasonable. And now they've been shifting to cooling is, if you can afford it, you can do it. We were bringing cooling in the corridors. Now cooling in the apartments is becoming a necessity. Shading on the exterior, almost a necessity. And so what we're looking at are cost-effective mechanical systems that are not refrigerant. Let's say we don't want, if we can, to bring refrigerant lines throughout our entire building. As ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if you heard, but one of the biggest culprits currently is the refrigerant off-gassing. And when you bring in heat pumps with lines going throughout an entire building, or well, another heat pump is called a variable frequency refrigerant system. So it's one box that can cool a lot of different units, but you have a lot of refrigerant going into small boxes and branches and going out throughout the building. Well, those fittings over time can leak. They're not healthy for the building. And so what we're looking at is packaged heating and cooling units that I can install in each apartment, and then reduce some of my ventilation ductwork. So we've talked with a company called Minutair, and we've talked with a company called, well, we haven't talked to them yet, but Frederick, which does a all-in-one box, heating, cooling, ventilation, dehumidification. On Monday, I'm gonna have a conversation with a company called Ipaka, which is a small wall unit that can go on a retrofit or in each apartment, provide 12,000 BTUs of heating and cooling, figuring out transfer grills, so on. So what we're trying to do is just provide heating and cooling and fresh air that has heat recovery in buildings that cost us less to install, first cost. That's what we're focusing on. But the idea of the battery is just because we're the state of Maine, the governor of Maine, we have a climate council. They want to reduce our carbon footprint by a certain amount by 2030 and 2050. Well, you can't do it using natural gas and propane and oil. So we need electricity, but straight resistance electricity, the grid won't ever be able to handle it. So how do we provide heating, cooling through electricity that uses less wattage or less BTUs and less energy? And that's what we're focusing on. But the next thought is, okay, now that we have all this electricity and we can have less fossil fuels for generators, let's just say, where do batteries come into play? And so that's our next quest, by the way. That's what our approach is.
Terrific. Yeah. Kathy Dorgan has her hand up. I'm going to unmute Kathy, and you can unmute and ask your question.
First of all, this has been a fabulous program. This is one of the best presentations I've seen in a long, long time, and I've been on a lot of Zooms this year. So thank you for the work, and thank you for sharing it. I just wanted to say on the battery backup conversation that in Connecticut, there are probably incentives for battery backup coming for people who are interested in it. And the Connecticut Green Bank, where I do a little bit of consulting, has a group working on that and things like that. So folks who are interested in that should reach out to Rudy Stark, who's on this line, to be connected with the folks doing that research. And, you know, maybe that's something we can all talk about at a future presentation if people are interested.
Well, since I'm never unmuted, which is great, I love, by the way, please keep me in the loop, because the information that I'm sharing with you is, trust me, I was a high school teacher right after college. So I wasn't born innately with this information. It came from trial and error and people like yourselves introducing and trying things and then seeing what works and then using it. And this battery backup, I had heard about it 6 years ago in a NESIA conference and think that this is the next thing we need, solar and the battery. So if you're further ahead than Maine, I want to hear about it. And I know everyone else in Maine will eventually need to hear about this as well. So thank you for sharing.
Okay, terrific. I have a couple of questions. but first, anybody in the audience now, I'm not seeing anything coming in the Q&A or the chat. Hold on a second. There is one from Susan. What are you able to do with the operational savings? And then I have a follow-up on that too, from Susan Odell.
That's a great question. So obviously, operational savings can go several different ways. Because we're so thinly financed, what we need to do is be able to have enough money to maintain our buildings. Our commitments are 99-year programs with HUD. So if we build a building that is inefficient and we actually have to spend more than our budgets, then when it's time to change a roof, which it's going to happen, or the windows and doors, we're strapped.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. So being able to afford our bills and actually save each year allows us to, first of all, have a stronger nest egg for when these major maintenance issues are required, and also be able to focus on our residents in a greater way. Have resident service programs, if it's possible, to be able to help spend more time in the buildings with facilities, with our residents, garden programs, reading programs for the children. Things like that allows us to have not only be more resilient with the building, but also more compassionate with our residents. That's what saving money can do.
Terrific. This is Dean. I have a follow-on to that about the operating costs. When you were doing the comparison costs, were all the O&M costs that you would anticipate or that you actually encountered over those years incorporated into that? You know, it's such as what you're talking about, problems with the roof or anything like that. And if so, that's part of then your cost benefit analysis. But are you seeing the high performance buildings actually from an O&M perspective performing better?
Good question. Yes. And what that means is when we're building buildings with boiler systems that have pumps and drives and all manner of mechanical systems that have potential failures, our maintenance response is greater. Our annual contracts with third-party vendors are higher because it costs more to manage a hydronic boiler system. That's a boiler system that runs baseboard throughout an entire building, and each apartment has their own sensors and stuff. So what we've learned is buildings that just have simple heat pumps, buildings that have just electric resistance, buildings that have simple hot water heater systems actually perform better because there's less maintenance required. Was that your question? Was that the point of your question?
Yeah, to a certain extent, but are they, is the higher performing systems that you might use might be more complicated and expensive, if I'm paraphrasing correctly, expensive to operate, but it's worth it. And the extra savings that Susan was talking about, the operational savings, are the savings that you get include those extra expenses. So you're still saving money, even though there's higher expenses for some of the equipment. Well, maybe I misunderstood.
I have I'm not sure, but I can, one of the first presentations I ever did, we did a rural development. It was a 20-unit garden style for senior project. It had some solar on it. There was hydronics. They had two boiler rooms in back of, not in basements, but in these little closets. I took photographs of these heating systems that had controls on top of controls on top of controls on top of controls. And they were so super, I'm going to say sophisticated because that's in a nice way. They were redundant and overdone. We couldn't figure them out. The contractor couldn't figure them out. We never got it right. And after 3 years, we realized that this one thing wasn't working and we were just blowing money out everywhere. And so we realized that we spent $30,000 in a 2-year period just to try to fix and get these systems working properly. It wasn't necessary. We could have done radiant heat with a simple, heat boiler, small little on demand in the apartment. It would have been done. And so overcomplicating, that was one of the things why the property managers wanted me to share with them what was my experience over the 4 years of these deep energy retrofits. And I had learned, and I expressed it, over engineering doesn't always yield better performance. In fact, keep it simple does work better sometimes.
Great. Okay. Again, I'm looking on the hands raised. If you have questions, burning or otherwise, for Todd, please raise your hands and I'll recognize you. But I do have one more for you, Todd, from me.
Okay.
And that has to do with the occupants. Have you gone back and talked to them, surveyed them about their levels of satisfaction and comfort? And have you seen, is it distinguishable the way some of your charts showed? It may have been embedded in some of them that the higher performing buildings have higher user satisfaction, but maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
You know what, that's a great point that I should add into, if I ever do this again. We do surveys every year, and just in general, every year, every 2 years, we do just a general resident survey, try to keep that data. And it's only anecdotal because I do go back to a lot of the buildings, and heat and hot, like the heating demand calls or no heat calls are lessened. And so it's only anecdotal. I don't have a measurement like would have said, what did our surveys say 5 years ago? What do they say today? I don't have that for you, but I do know that residents that I've seen and that I've talked to have not had heating and hot water concerns, and that's important. But again, I tell you what, I would love to follow up with you on that and share that with this group at a later date.
Well, yeah, I'm sure we would love to hear it. I mean, because anecdotally, I think all of us think that the higher performing buildings are actually higher on the user comfort and satisfaction scales as well. But yeah, we'd love to see what your tenants are saying and the people that are your occupants of your buildings. One other question.
Can I follow up with that one?
Sure.
In building science and how we build these better buildings, we really focus on the envelope. So originally we said a code building does insulation on the inside of the stud walls, and then more and more codes are elevating, and so we started with 1 inch on the outside, 1.5 inches, 2 inches. If you can get 2.5 inches of rigid insulation on the outside, all the better for thermal comfort. And now we've learned air sealing is even of greater importance. And here's why I say that. Somebody sitting at a chair at their office, or sitting at a chair or their couch at their house, and there's a difference in temperature of less than 4 degrees from their head to their ankles, right? So if it's 70 degrees at the thermostat level, but it's 67 degrees at the floor level, well, people are going to say that the house is drafty and it's uncomfortable. If somebody goes into a room and it's the one room is 70 degrees, and then they walk into their bedroom and it's 68 degrees, 2-degree difference. They're going to say that it's freezing in that room because that's just the way the skin operates. And science has proven that and shown that. And so by our insulation and our air sealing and our way of spreading the heat out more evenly, people are going to be more comfortable. I always used to, whenever I go into an office, when we were allowed to go into the office in a full manner, during the spring, summer, when I would walk into the office building and I was like, oh, it's so comfortable in here, I knew that 50% of the people in there were freezing. And I knew that there'd be the little heaters underneath the chairs because it was so cold. Because it was comfortable, but it was that differential on people's feet were always freezing in their space. And so we had to just how to spread the temperature more evenly. Triple glazed windows, air sealing, insulation allows the room itself to hold that heat in a better way and have less drafts coming in the wrong way. There's your thermal comfort education.
Yeah, you often wonder if they notice it. They notice when they're uncomfortable. They notice it when they.
You'll notice it if they're uncomfortable. Trust me. I get the emails.
Yeah. Not for many of us today. So a couple more have come in. Don Berg, how do you resolve Legionnaire's concerns with restrictive hot water temps that promote possible growth? Technical question about the hot water systems.
Well, I know. Well, 140 degree temp at the unit, and then we just use our mixing valves before they leave the room. But we don't have small apartments that we'll have a holding tank without recirculating. So most of our multifamily units have a larger hot water heater, and then they're on a recirc, so that there's no standing water for long periods of time. So we don't usually run.
Yeah, Don, I unmuted you if you want to follow up on that.
So you don't have a concern with the recirc line being 120 necessarily, as long as it's recirculating on a regular basis.
All right, as long as it's recirculating, going through the system and then coming out at the higher temp, we're not gonna have that Legionnaire's issue. Is that something that you've had a problem with?
No, just a concern, and our mixing valve only accommodates our hot water heaters that heat 6 apartments through recirculation for domestic hot water. Our hot water heaters need to be set at less than 125 degrees, or else our mixing valve can't compensate it down to 120. So
yeah. Do you have small apartments? Do you have 6 units? Is that what I'm hearing?
6 units in a building, 4 buildings on our site. So 24 senior units built 3 years ago using plans developed in 2012, Department of Housing issue.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we can talk about that with.
I'd love to do that after, yeah, about where if you have a booster heater before it hits the apartment.
Yeah, or either that, or we just have maybe a regimen where once a month or once every 6 months we boost up the hot water heaters, warn the tenants so they don't burn themselves, and then dial it back. We just haven't done anything yet. It's been a minor concern. Apparently, with a lot of units, it hasn't been a big concern. It hasn't been a big issue with you. That's good to hear.
That's really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, there's more of a comment from Alex Esposito. Air sealing is also an important factor in controlling moisture in walls. I'll unmute you, Alex, if you want to sort of unpack that a little bit with Todd. Yeah, you're self-muted now. If you want to unmute, then you could follow up on that. But the comment is air sealing is also an important factor in controlling moisture in walls. And maybe your experience with that, Todd.
Well, I can only know that, for instance, we had a property built in the 1900s. They were actually, this one had a 3-unit, it was a group of 3-unit buildings, now that I think about it. But they were all it wasn't sheathing, it was all planks. And so with a Tyvek, which is a house wrap just to keep water out. And so we had a lot of penetration of air, cold air, moist air, and closets were a culprit of turning moldy. Bathrooms, of course. And so the key was we've been replacing that with proper insulation. Blueskin, if you use Henry Blueskin, takes care of a lot of the issues of air leakage on older retrofits that you might do. And it's more about air circulation, not so much on not as much on it's the cold on the outside that hits the warm on the inside. And if you have a lot of moisture on the inside. So how are you moving air on the inside of the apartment? How are you, extracting the humid air on the inside? How are you distributing the air throughout that apartment? Also, like, tell me about where the mold is coming from. Might help a little further there too.
Okay. Alex put in the chat that he doesn't have a mic, so maybe you guys can get together offline and talk about that a little more.
Right.
I had one question. In one of your early slides, you talked about the issues that you were dealing with on a regular basis, and one of them was that you were, it was under-resourced. Typically, the clients you're working for are not under-resourced, but it's a tight budgets and caps that you had to deal with. When you moved into higher performance, did you do it within the caps and within the budgets you were handed, or did you have workarounds where you could increase the budgets in order to accommodate some of the higher performance strategies that you were using?
So it's a priority list. So in Maine, a cap is a cap, and we can't extend ourselves above the cap for high performance. In New Hampshire, if you committed to a passive house, you were able to nudge your cap up a little bit to absorb the passive house goals and criteria. Maine is currently just recently looking at allowing a 3% uptick. They're working with Efficiency Maine to fund the delta between a typical cap and a passive house cap to help us get there, because in some of the larger buildings, the soft costs could be even up to $100,000. So on a $10 million project, $300,000 bump, $100,000 goes just to the modeling, and then the inspections, the extra blower door tests, the certifications at the end, the commissioning. It's all part of. It's just required to be able to say improve, and it's helpful to make sure we get that certification and accomplish the passive house requirement. The $200,000 extra would go, if we spread it out like peanut butter. Windows will take a big chunk of it, and because normally we might do good double glazed, but a high performance triple glaze, you're looking at a $25 per square foot for a window. So if a window is 15 square feet, whatever it costs X. If it's a passive house, it might be $45 a square foot. So a 3 foot by 5 foot, 15 square feet times the extra money costs a lot more money. The insulation is important. You might add more insulation on the outside. So we're really, it's razor thin to say 3% will get us to passive house. That's why we're trying to figure out where we can cut some of our costs in installing the old way to hit those caps. But even if we were able to bring in new funding, our requirements with our housing authorities won't allow it, unless it's this new program that we're just talking with them. Literally, it was in this last month. I would encourage all housing authorities to consider a metrics. If a building can prove that they can meet certain thresholds, to work with them to get there. Like I said, it's not free to the developer, and no one's making a windfall of money. You're spending money, you're saving, putting it back in the building, and you're reducing carbon footprint. I mean, that's where we're all trying to be on the same page.
I think there's a lot of people in the network and on today's presentation who agree with you both in what we're trying to do, and also some of the obstacles that need to be overcome to do it completely. I think all of us are dealing with that at some level or another.
Right.
Okay, everybody, last chance. Raise your hands, or in 3, 2, 1. Okay. We'll consider the presentation done. Todd, I think it was terrific. Got a lot of interest. I think the P2P is going to be trying to digest what they heard today over the next month or two. But with that, we'll conclude. Everybody You can raise your hands now and pretend you're clapping for Todd, but I thought it was a great presentation. Susan, do you want to come back in and have any closing remarks? Susan Odell?
I just want to thank Todd so much. This was terrific. And I just am so grateful that you were willing to give us the time and the energy to put this together and share it with us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I appreciated the opportunity, and welcome follow-up. Any questions that can go through your team back to me, I would be glad to do what I can to follow up.
Wonderful.
Terrific.
Appreciate
Okay,
it.
and others who are still on, the people from the P2P, we have a couple of little business related things here, just about whether we're all going. So if you want to stay on for a few minutes, I see people are jumping off. It shouldn't take too long. Todd, you're more than welcome to listen in or just jump off. We should be on for about another 5-10 minutes, something like that. So thank you again. And yeah, I guess the people who are still on, just quickly about where we are with P2P. We're continuing. We're going to have another session in a month with Adam Romano from Stephen Winter Associates, talking about passive house domestic hot water. Todd, you're welcome, if you're still listening, to join that. And then we're hoping to have Nick Jones at the end of June talking about Eversource's initiatives with respect to passive house. And in the interim, just a quick update, the network has spent some time over the last 6-7 months working on the QAP process and developing information and training and stuff like that, or at least, information basically, with a small QAP working group. We haven't really done as much of the broader P2P network stuff over the last couple of 5-6 months, but that's going to start up again now and moving into FY 2022 in the summer and through the rest of 2022, 21 and 22 next year. So you'll hear more from us about where that's all moving, and we hope to reconvene the bigger group in person as soon as possible, but online for the foreseeable future, the next couple of sessions. And so we encourage you all to continue to participate. And now that we're virtual and everybody doesn't have to come to one place, maybe spread the word out, and we'll try to get more people engaged with these as we move forward. So with that, I think unless Kathy or Alicia or anybody has anything new that they want to say, and just raise your hand and I'll open it up to you, and raise. I don't know. I'll click. Kathy, your hand is up, but I think it's from before. Do you want to say anything, Kathy Dorgan?
No, I was trying to clap. So, maybe you can unmute everybody and that's left and we can clap, because it was a great presentation.
Yeah, everybody has to, the way this works, everybody has to unmute themselves. So I'm unmuting you from my end, but.
Okay, so, well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. As always, great conversation and good questions, but Todd, just an amazing presentation. Exactly, I think, the questions we've all been asking. So thank you.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. Glad.
Yeah. This is
All right,
Alicia.
thanks everybody. Todd.
Yeah, thanks,
Oh,
Todd.
sorry,
That was
Alicia, go
great.
ahead.
Okay, I guess I'll go. See
Bye,
y'all.
all.
And Todd, one question I have for you. This is Dean. Are you still there?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Do you interact at all with Doug Baston up there in Maine?
Who's that
Do you know
now?
who he is? His name is Doug Baston.
No.
I think he was involved with Efficiency Maine. I worked with him quite a bit, maybe 5 years ago. He's big in Maine and also down in Massachusetts on utility programs and stuff like that. Just curious if you'd run across him.
No, mostly
Haven't seen him.
Michael Stoddard is in charge right now of Efficiency Maine.
Yeah, okay. All right. Well, good. Thank you again from Maine, from Connecticut to Maine, and back again.
I'm driving by Sunday. By the way, I'm in Long Island right now visiting with my family, and first time in a year, and I will be at Ryan's Deli probably on Sunday. It goes right.
Well, honk your horn for us.
Might be a place you'd run into.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So,
Thank you all.
Bye.